We come today to the last week of the first half of Daniel, the first half of the narrative portion, the storytelling, historical portion of the book of Daniel. The story of Daniel begins in 605 BC when, after centuries of rebellion and sin from God's people, rejecting his rule and reign, God allowed the Babylonian Empire to come in and conquer the southern kingdom of Judah, to defeat the city of Jerusalem, and to take into exile some of the best and brightest, the youngest, the children of the nobles, like the best and the brightest that Judah had to offer. They're taken into exile, and they're taken to Babylon. They're around 14 to 17-year-old, and we only know about 4 of the names of those people who were taken. Daniel was one of them. Daniel and his friends, they are taken into exile. They are living in a strange land. They end up coming up through a program that makes these conquered foreigners wards of the court, stewards of the court, workers within the king's court. And so Daniel basically becomes a servant of King Nebuchadnezzar and then later King Belshazzar. Now, as we come to what we're going to study this week, as we come to the end of the first half of Daniel, Daniel's not 14 to 17 years old anymore. He's been in Babylon his whole life. As we open up Daniel chapter 6 today, Daniel is 80 years old. He is still a slave in exile. He is still serving a foreign king. As we pick up today, he's not serving a Babylonian king. He's serving a king of the Medes and the Persians, a king by the name of Darius, because another empire had come in and conquered Babylon. Last week we saw that. And so now Daniel at 80 years old is having to adjust to a whole new change. And remember, Daniel's been faithful his entire life. He was living in the wake of generational sin. And as we pick up today, we pick up in Daniel chapter 6, which may be one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible. It is a Sunday school staple story. If you grew up in the church, you've had this story taught to you at least a dozen times. If you've never darkened the door of a church before, you've probably heard of Daniel in the lion's den. Now, here's the thing about this story, though. There's a whole lot more to this story than we remember from Sunday school. There's so much in this ancient story that is speaking into our modern lives, and the story's not exactly as we remember. I think we'll find some surprises along the way. But if we're to take away what we're supposed to take away from this text today, we've got to approach it with an open mind, with an open heart, and to not allow ourselves to go, I've already heard this story before. There's nothing new to hear. I'll put to you, there's a lot for us to hear and a lot for us to apply to our lives as we dive into Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, where Daniel's still facing the pressure to compromise, but he continues to live with conviction. Verse 1, it says, it pleased Darius, this is the new king of the Medes and Persians, to set over the kingdom's 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was found in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. This new king goes to organize and bring some structure and governance to this new territory that he has conquered. And he does it by elevating 3 men, one of which is Daniel, to set him over the entire kingdom. But we've got to remember that Daniel is a slave in a strange land. Daniel's serving in the court, like he would have been dressed in fine clothes. He's not living in a gutter somewhere. But Daniel's not free. Daniel has no autonomy to go where he wants to go and do what he wants to do. He is living under the thumb of a king who conquered the king who conquered his people. Daniel, in the midst of this setting where he had every excuse to go, God, this is so unfair. There's no reason for me to keep saying yes to you. There's no reason for me to keep obeying you. For him to throw this enormous pity party, Daniel never does that. He just continues to serve faithfully. And also, he continues to stand out. Over and over, we see Daniel standing out among the crowd when he has 2 strikes against him at least from the get-go. He's not from there. He is a foreigner in a strange land, and he's a servant and a slave in a strange land. So Daniel stands out. But why? We see in verse 3 that they say that there's an excellent spirit in him. If we go back to chapter 4, it says that the spirit of the holy gods is in Daniel. And then in chapter 1, it says among all the exiles that were taken in that wave, none of them was like Daniel. The Babylonians and then the Persians after them, they didn't always have the right words to describe who Daniel was. They didn't always have the right words to understand exactly what was happening in Daniel's heart and in his life, but they always knew that there was something different about him. Daniel's consistent, godly character always stood out from the worldly crowd. There was something different about the way he lived, something different about the way he stood for what he believed in, something different about not posturing himself and trying to navigate all the politics of the court to advance his own career. He just kept being the man that God had called him to be. And because of that, he kept standing out. But you know what? It's not always safe to stand out. Look at verse 4. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground of complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." These other high officials, they look at Daniel, they say, this guy doesn't mess up. I'd imagine them like having private investigators, sitting outside his home with binoculars trying to catch him doing something. They're following him to see where he goes, see if he does anything he's not supposed to do. And they realize, after looking for dirt, doing all they could do to find some dirt on Daniel, they could find nothing on him. Why? Well, it says it there in the text. Daniel was faithful, and no error, no fault could be found in him. As I'm reading through that, and as I hear that, and I hear the impact of people are looking to tear him down, to find something, some dirt in his life or in his past, to say, see, you aren't who you said you are. You aren't the person you pretend to be. Here we've got something on you. Man, may we live in such a way that people would look at us and go, we can't find anything that's inconsistent in their lives. Just as Daniel was an ambassador for God in Babylon, we're called to be ambassadors for Christ in a lost and dark world. May we live so faithfully that no error or fault can be found in us. And the key to that is that when we do fail, we don't pretend like we never fail. That when we fall short, we own it, we confess it. We aren't people who are saved by our perfection. We trust on the perfect grace of God. When we're looking at living faithfully that way, my prayer is that we would live in such a way as a church family that the only accusation somebody could bring against us is that we're way too much like Jesus. I would love for that to be the accusation. Look at verse 6. Then these high officials and these satraps, they came by agreement to the king, and they said, "O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the documents that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius, sign the document and the injunction." The only point of attack that these other leaders could find in Daniel to try and get rid of him, the only attack they could have lived at the intersection of Daniel's faithfulness and the king's ego. So they go into the king's throne room. They say, "King, you know what? You're so amazing. We should pass a law to make sure all of your people know how amazing you are. For 30 days, they can make no request of any man or God other than coming to you. So now your empire will know that every good and perfect gift comes from your throne." That's the idea of the edict. And there's something written in there where it says, and it cannot be revoked. You can't go in and change this. There was a law within the structure of the Medes and the Persians that if the king made a law, the law couldn't be changed. Why? Well, because you didn't want kings having a bad day one day and going, "No one can eat turkey in my kingdom." Wouldn't be the worst law. There's a reason we only eat turkey once a year. It's not that great, right? But if you had people say, you can't have turkey, and then the next day he goes, "You know what I want? I want turkey." And then you'd have a king on the throne wielding power willy-nilly according to his whims. And they don't want the king to look that way because the idea in this culture, this time, was the king is divine, and if he's changing his mind every day, that means he's making mistakes. So if there was a law passed and the king signed the law could not be changed. That's a key part of the story. So once the law is signed, the news starts to spread. Everyone's aware of the rules, including Daniel. Look at verse 10. Verse 10 says, when Daniel knew the document had been signed, and he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem, he got down on his knees 3 times a day, and he prayed, and he gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. On the day that Daniel heard the king's edict, Daniel prayed the same way that he did every day. Daniel went up into his house and he opened up the windows. He didn't draw the curtains to hide what he was doing. He went up the day he hears the edict, the day he hears the law against prayer to anyone other than the king. You can't make a petition to anybody but the king. Daniel goes, well, every day I've done this in all my years that I've been in Babylon. And God has been faithful to me every step along the way. I'm going right back to what I keep doing all the time because I trust God. He goes up into his house. He opens up the windows. Everybody can see what he's doing. And he bows down and he prays. The edict is clear. The consequences of the edict are clear. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's not a minor fine. It's an appointment with the lion's den. Do you notice the time frame of the edict really isn't all that long? It's 30 days. 30 days you can't pray, or if you're praying, do it in a way where you can't be caught. 30 days is all that's being asked of you. Let's be honest, modern churchgoers, we probably not prayed for 30 days with absolutely no injunction against us. Daniel says, even if it costs me my life, I'm not going to stop doing what I've always done. The only way I've survived all these decades in this foreign land is because God has been faithful. How could I turn my back on him now? In those moments where obedience would be costly, in those moments where courage would be costly, in those moments where standing out from the world could be costly, you and I won't face lions' dens, at least not today. But we may face moments where it's costly to do the thing that God would have us to do. In those moments, how do we respond? It's clear how Daniel responded, but how do we respond? We offer a couple of possible responses. The first one is this. First one is to chicken out, panic, and cave in. We're more concerned with pleasing man than we are with pleasing God. And in a moment where courage is needed, where obedience would be costly, where standing out might have a price, in that moment, we get uncomfortable. We don't want to make anybody else uncomfortable. So we chicken out. We cave in. The second response is a little more bold, but maybe not any more right. The second one is to bow up, to respond from a place of pride, to bow up to the opposition, right? To be in a position where you're like, you're not the boss of me. You're not going to tell me what to do. I know better than you do. In fact, I'm probably better than you are anyways. It's more of it comes from an I'm better than you perspective than a God's the best thing. I'm not going to compromise it. I'm trusting God no matter what. Sometimes we respond with boldness, but it's not submissive boldness. It's not trusting boldness. It's prideful boldness. Not sure that's any better. The third one is this, what Daniel did. We kneel down. We take the problem to God in prayer. This is not a one-time win for Daniel. It's not as if Daniel had spent all these decades in Babylon doing the wrong thing, and on this day he did the right thing. I'll put to you that Daniel's doing the right thing on this day because he kept doing the right thing for decades at a time. This was a pattern in his life. His instinct was to take his problems to God. No matter what he faced, he took his problems to God. Whether it was simple and easy and safe, he took his problems to God. Whether it was at the risk of his own life, he took his problems to God. Daniel chose prayer because Daniel trusted God. But doing the right thing is no guarantee of an easy outcome. In verses 11 through 13, Daniel's accusers, they see him pray because Daniel's doing it in open windows at the top of his house facing Jerusalem, right? Everybody can see him pray. His accusers see him, and they bring the accusation to the king and reminded the king of his unchangeable edict. Look at verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes of the Persian that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. We see here in the text, the king didn't want to execute Daniel. He had seen Daniel when he came into this new empire that he was governing. He had seen Daniel and thought what people had thought about Daniel through the whole story. There's something different about this guy. This guy stands out from the rest. This is a guy I need. This is a guy I can trust. This is a guy I respect. I think he actually probably even liked Daniel. There seems to be a mutual affection between Daniel and all the leaders that he served. But the king's ego had put him into a no-win situation. And he spent all day trying to find a way out. But by the end of the day, Daniel's accusers, they come back. They call the question. They say, King, you've passed an edict. King, you said that anybody who bows and prays and makes a request of any other person, let alone God, they're going to go in the lion's den. And your law, your edicts, they cannot be changed. Look at verse 16. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. And the king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Imagine this moment. Here's our Sunday school moment, right? The story that if you grew up in the church, you know it all like you just know it thoroughly, right? Even if you didn't grow in church, people know this story. There's a man named Daniel. He's thrown into a lion's den. He isn't eaten. God saves him. They know the story, right? Here's the Sunday school story. But imagine for a moment, let's put ourselves into the story. For a moment, let's have ourselves sort of take on two first-person views of this moment. The first one being, imagine you're the king. You know it's your pride that those guys came in and used against you. You know it's your ego that they came in and talked you into doing this thing, and now you're in this no-win situation. He's not like, oh my goodness, how did I end up here? He knows they fooled him, but he can't go back on his edict, or he could lose the whole kingdom. So he's sitting there, and he sees this man that he respects, this man he probably likes, and he knows it's his fault that Daniel's there. Daniel's just doing what Daniel's always done, and the king trusts him and respects him for that, even though he doesn't pray to that God. The king knows this is my fault. And the king watched as Daniel enters the lion's den without a hint of panic and without a hint of pride. It's one view of the moment. Let's flip the view around and let's think for a moment. Imagine you're Daniel. Imagine you're Daniel. The den is opened and Daniel can see inside. The light from the outside is shining into the space, right? And staring back at Daniel in the shadows is this. This picture was taken by a photographer from Pakistan who was on safari taking some pictures, and he had stepped out of his car. You ever see those people on social media that step out of their car to take a picture of things? They're like strolling up to the bison, no big deal, right? This guy gets out of his car to take a picture of the lion. And this is the picture that he takes, right? You know what the lion does right after this picture's taken? Sprints toward him. The guy barely gets into the car and closes the door before the lion hits the car, but he's got a great picture, doesn't he? He needs new shorts, but he's got a great picture. Imagine you're Daniel and the light from the outside is shining into the den of lions. And all you see coming out of the shadows and into the light is that view. That face, those teeth. Imagine you're Daniel for a moment. Would anybody have faulted Daniel in that moment? Would any of us go, oh, Daniel, you backed down in that moment. How dare you, right? Could any of us fault Daniel in that moment? You're like, my bad, take it back. 30 days, you said? All good. 30 days, king. Can we hit reset on this one? None of us would fault him, would we? Staring that down, how do you see that and step into the den without panic and without pride? How in the world do you do that? Well, we see it over and over and over again through church history. Daniel's not the only person who ever died for their faith in God. To this day, people die because of their faith in Jesus. To this day, people are beaten and stoned and drowned and burned, sometimes by their family members because they've trusted in Jesus. How do you stay strong and courageous and bold and faithful when that's the image that you're seeing, when you're covered in gasoline and the match is coming, how do you stay faithful? Well, I put to you it's because that's not the first moment of decision you've ever faced. You're making that decision in that moment because you've reached a point where courage, where obedience is your default response. In that moment, how do you see that lion and walk boldly into the lion's den? Because you decided long ago that there's no scenario where you would compromise on your faith. You can't have compromised on your faith time and time and time again, and then face the moment when the fangs are staring you in the shadows, and then go, I think I'll try obedience this time. I think I'll try courage this time. That's just not how it works. You guys ever looking for something on Google? You sit down and you start to type, and it starts to autofill what you're trying to search for. And it'll often go to what you searched for before, right? You type in one letter, and here's what you searched for before. Why? Because Google is watching your past patterns to predict your future searches. In our lives, our past patterns are going to shape our present decisions. Our hearts are going to autofill our responses with the patterns we have built in the past. Courage and obedience are these autofill habits that you have to build up over years of consistent patterns. I put to you, none of us can do this in our strength. In this moment, this can only happen because God is giving someone the courage to be there. But we've got to have a pattern in our lives of going, God, I can't, but you can. Give me courage. God, I'm supposed to stand out, but I want to blend in. Give me courage. God, obeying you right here and standing for your truth is going to be costly. I can't do this on my own. God, give me courage. This pagan king who believes in multiple gods and worships the different things on different days, depending on how the day is going, he watches a man called Daniel, a slave in his kingdom, get cast into the lion's den. And in the midst of that, the king has one last wish. Did you hear it? You can hardly even call it a prayer. The king says, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. King Darius didn't know God, but he knew Daniel. And that gave him enough understanding of who God was to, in a hopeless moment, be able to look at that and go, I don't know Daniel's God, but I sure hope Daniel is right. There's no record of Daniel ever preaching a sermon in the text so far in his book. But Daniel's life spoke volumes. Most of us in this room will never stand on a stage with a mic and some notes and share a sermon. It's just not something that all of us do. But I tell you, your life is preaching a sermon every single day to the people who are around you. They may not know God, but if they know you and they know you know Jesus, they're learning about Jesus by watching you. May they, in their most hopeless moments, say, I don't know Jesus, but I know someone who does, and I really hope they're right. Let me see what happens here. Let me see how they respond to this worst moment. Let me see how they respond to this office politics. Let me see how they respond to a moment where boldness and courage is required to stand up. Let me see if this Jesus thing is real by watching this person's life. Daniel's life was so clearly marked by his faith that a pagan's king's only thought was, I made a mess of things, but I sure hope Daniel's right about his God. And if he is, if Daniel's right about this, maybe there's still hope. After the lion's den is sealed with the king's signet ring, the king has a rough night. Look at verse 18. Then the king went to his palace, and he spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at break of day, the king arose, and he went in haste to the den of lions, and he came near to the den where Daniel was, and he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And as before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded Daniel to be brought out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted God. I find it funny in this moment that on the night that Daniel's in the lion's den, the king is wide awake. J.D. Greer, as I was studying this, shared this thought, and I want to share it with you guys. On this night, while Daniel's in the lion's den, literally surrounded by, fanged muscular death, right? Everywhere around him. The king is worrying, his enemies are celebrating, his friends are praying, the angel is protecting, and Daniel slept well. Everybody had a long night except Daniel. As I've gone through this text this week, and it's a text that I can't remember a time when I didn't know it. Some of my earliest memories are being at church as a kid, and I can't remember a time when I didn't know Daniel in the lion's den as a story from the Bible, that I didn't know how it ended. As I'm studying it this week and I'm diving into it, I'm struck by a couple things. The first one is how little the chapter actually focuses on the lion den moment. There's a whole lot before it and there's a whole lot after it. It's just a few verses of Daniel being in the lion's den. And even on the verses while Daniel's in the lion's den, it's not actually in the lion's den. Wouldn't you love to know Daniel's experience within the lion's den? Wouldn't you love to know what he's thinking, what he's going through? Did he and the angel talk? Did anything go on? Was he able to chill and pet these things like pets? What was going on here? You see nothing of what happens in the actual, you think, action. Where's the action? It's back at the palace. It's the king's sleepless night. It's the king waking up in the morning and running. It's not Daniel going, I made it through one night. Will I make it through more? Am I ever going to get out of here, right? I'm surprised how little it focuses on the lion's den, and I'm surprised how little it focuses on Daniel. You know how many lines, how many quotes Daniel has in the entire chapter? One. Daniel in the lion's den, that's the story we know. Daniel's only got one line. This story that we all know very well is not really the story we remember from Sunday school. This chapter focuses more on King Darius than it does on Daniel. After that sleepless night, the king hurries to the lion's den. The seal is broken, the stone is rolled back, and the king cried out into the darkness, Daniel, servant of the Most High God, that you serve continually, did your God save you? And Daniel's found unharmed. And it says because he trusted God. We saw in week 1 as we were talking through this, and I think it's been true every week, that in week 1 we talked about the fact that we think of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego as these heroes of these Old Testament stories. But there's really nothing heroic that they do other than trusting God. Daniel's only great deed was deciding long ago to trust God no matter what. They're not the heroes of the story. God's the hero of the story. In the story where we have Daniel in the lion's den, we're called to everybody be a Daniel. Let's be a Daniel. Should we live more like Daniel? Yes, we should. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is not the heroics of Daniel. It's the greatness of God. And in the midst of this, one of my struggles as I'm going through this book, I just want you to hear this and sort of put a pin in it for next week and join us next week as we dive into this. One of my struggles in preaching through this book is that all the stories end well. Daniel won't eat the king's meal. He won't eat and defile himself in chapter 1 with unclean food, and everything turns out okay. Daniel 2, the king wants his dream interpreted, even though he won't tell anybody his dream. Daniel and all the wise men of the kingdom are set to be executed. But Daniel goes and he prays, and he ends up being given the interpretation, even though he never heard the dream. Everything turns out okay. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace. Everything turns out okay. Over and over again. Everything turns out okay. King Nebuchadnezzar, stripped of his pride, because of his pride, stripped of his power, lives like a beast. How does it turn out? Everything turns out okay, right? Do all of our stories turn out okay? And if they don't turn out okay, is that because we didn't trust God enough? I don't think that's the case. I can't see that in Scripture. You know how Jesus' followers' lives ended up? Dying for the faith. Was that because they didn't trust God enough? Not at all. What do we do when the stories don't turn out okay? At least from what we can see right now. We're going to talk about that next week. I want you to come back for that as we come out of this series and into a new series. We're not done with this story yet, but I just want to put this here because this is where it fits. There will be moments in our lives when our stories take a turn we never would have signed up for and they don't turn out okay. How do we respond in those moments? What does God want us to learn in those moments? That's next week, because we can't really see that from the Daniel stories, can we? Because over and over again, and they lived happily ever after. At least they got out of the fiery furnace. Let's come back to that then. At this point, we must understand this, what this story is really about. The main point of this passage, sometimes we think, is the miracle of the lions' mouths being shut. It's certainly there. God showing up in a huge way is certainly there. But the main point of the passage is not the miracle that God performed. The main point of the passage is the impact of the miracle on the heart of the king. Look at verse 24. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, they were brought and they were cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Hear what this pagan king says. Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. We know Daniel, the book of Daniel, as a book of these amazing miracles where God shows up in a huge way to rescue his people, where his people live with courage and conviction in a land that threatens them with their death if they won't compromise. In the midst of this, I want you to see that in many ways the focus of Daniel is not the miracles that God did. It's the mission that God's people were on. This book is really a missionary journal, all about God using his people to make himself known to the nations. You can make a really solid case. You ever wondered why the wise men, when they see the star and it rises and they go to find a king who has been born, how do they know to look for a king? You can make a really solid case that it's the faithfulness of Daniel and his friends in this region of the world where the Magi came from that planted the seed for those people to go, God's doing something over there that I learned about from somebody who lived generations before me. The first half of Daniel ends with King Darius giving a pretty powerful sermon, pretty powerful declaration of who God is and what he's done, declaring what he'd learned about God from a man who'd never preached a sermon. Daniel's faith and hope made the Lord known to the nations that had defeated his nation, all because Daniel lived with faithful conviction, even under life-threatening pressure to compromise. As we reach the end of the first half of the story, we're going to come back after Easter. Between here and Easter, we're going to march toward the cross and the empty tomb for the next 3 weeks. When we come back after Easter, we're going to go to the second half of the book of Daniel. First half looking at a conviction and compromise. Second half looking at promises and prophecies. It's a very different section of the book, written in a very different style, telling things from a very different perspective. But as we end this narrative portion, looking at the life and service of Daniel, you and I are living in modern-day Babylon. Not geographically, but spiritually. Scripture is very clear. This world is not our home. That if you're a follower of Jesus, your citizenship is in heaven, and you are merely a sojourner, a traveler in this world. And you are here to be an ambassador for God. And while we are challenged and humbled by this faithful example of this man, Daniel, I want to put to us that our hope is clearer than Daniel's ever was. Daniel had no knowledge of the cross. Daniel never heard about the empty tomb. Daniel never knew that those things would happen, and yet Daniel was living out a preview of the Christ to come. Daniel was unjustly accused and condemned. Daniel was thrown into darkness with certainty of death. Daniel had a stone rolled in place that was sealed with a signet of the ruler, and when the stone was rolled away, God had been revealed to be victorious. Jesus is the greater Daniel who faced the lion den of our sin and death in our place, and he emerged victorious on the other side, and he invites us to live a life that joins him in that victory by surrendering our lives to his rule and his reign, by trusting in his sacrifice. We live in times that are every bit as pagan, every bit as lost, every bit as dark as it was in Babylon. But we know Jesus, the greater Daniel, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Our times are sinful. I am heartbroken at what I see transpiring in our country and in our world. It is not pessimistic to say we are on a trajectory that is unsustainable. I think it would be foolish, if not insane, to deny that reality. Our lives, our world, our culture are increasingly sinful and dark. And I put to you, increasingly unsafe to follow Jesus. I don't want to equate what Daniel's facing with what we face. It is not the same thing. I don't want to equate what we are facing with what our brothers and sisters face in countries that are close to the gospel. It is not the same thing. What I'm talking about is the trajectory where we are. It is heading toward being increasingly unsafe to follow Jesus. We said this in week 1 of this passage, and I want to say it as we close. We cannot choose our times, but we must choose our response. And fulfilling our mission requires us to live with conviction. Like Daniel, we are called to live for Jesus in a world that looks a lot like Babylon. And between now and the day that we see Christ, we are to live in such a way that the world can see Christ in us. So that the world may not know Jesus, but they know in good times and in bad, when it's easy and when it's hard, when it's safe and when it's dangerous, that you live in such a way that you're never going to compromise on obeying, following, and serving Christ. In Luke 6:46, Jesus said this, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then you don't do what I tell you?" There will be moments in your life this week, big moments, possibly, small moments, definitely, where you and I have the option of obedience or compromise, of boldness or compromise, of courage or compromise. In those moments, are we going to say, "Lord, Lord, but I want to do what I want"? "Lord, Lord, but it's not comfortable to follow you here"? "Lord, Lord, but if I'm to obey, it might be costly"? In these moments, what are we going to do? How will they know what Jesus is like if our default response is compromise? If you've not already decided today to surrender your life to Jesus as Lord and Savior, you're on your own, and you will face the lion den of judgment one day, and you won't come through that unscathed, because our only hope is that Christ went into the lion den for us. Our only hope is that he faced sin and death on our behalf. If you're not following Jesus today, you will face that judgment on your own, and you lived on your own terms, you'll stand in judgment day on your own terms too. But if you're following Jesus, we want to live in such a way where our default response, the autofill of our hearts, is obedience and courage. And if you've not already decided to respond with courage and conviction, then you and I are likely to stumble and fall. As we complete this series, this first half of Daniel, I ask you, is your life marked by conviction or compromise? Is your yes on the table to trust and obey God, no matter what? Let's pray. God, I thank you for your word and for your love, for the hope that we have in Jesus, that we recognize that being right with you and living rightly for you is not something we can accomplish. Our only hope of salvation, of being made right before you, is by grace through faith in Christ alone. Lord, it's in your mercy that you call us to repentance, not on our merits. I thank you for that. That is good news. But Lord, as I consider not only how we are right with you in terms of being justified, in terms of being saved, in terms of being brought from the dominion of darkness to the kingdom of your Son, Lord, help us to live like we're sons and daughters of the King. Lord, let us not compromise in matters that are small. Let us not compromise in matters that are big. Lord, let us not compromise in sins that we think are secret. There is nothing that is secret to you. Lord, let us not compromise in those moments where not bowing up boldness is called for, but humble Christ is enough and Christ is worth it boldness. Lord, let us live in a courageous way, but in a way that sounds like Jesus, living at that intersection and tension of uncompromising truth and unconditional love in a world that says there is no sin except calling something a sin. Lord, we were sinners, and it is because you died in our place that we have hope. And now you have called us to bring the light of Christ, the hope of Jesus, to a world that desperately needs the hope that we have. Daniel didn't have to open his mouth and preach a sermon to have people know that he knew the one true God. Lord, may we live in such a way that when you open the doors for us to share the good news of Jesus, to talk about who you are and what you've done, that our lives have been preaching the same message over and over and over again for days and weeks and months and years. Help us be a people who are marked by conviction and not compromise. Let us be a people who look and sound and love like Jesus. Lord, let a lost, lonely, and dark world that is marching toward judgment and destruction, Lord, may we be ambassadors where you are making your case through us. In Jesus' name we pray.